Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3 Iron, and today in our third episode of our featured weekly build discussion, I decided to throw it back to a classic build that recently has gotten a buff in 3.9, and that is of course Arc Witch. Now, the best Arc Witch guide that is out there, many of you will recognize this because this is Enki's Arc Witch. That is by far, I believe, the most popular single post on Path of Exile's entire forum. When you go and you look at some of the most popular builds in all of Path of Exile history, even if you look at this list right here, you can see some builds get like a couple 100,000 hits. Maybe if a build is really top-notch, something that a lot of players play for a long period of time, like let's say Summoners, you might get a few million views on that particular build. But this is Enki's Arc Witch, which I'm actually assuming most of you who are watching today are actually only watching because either A, you're genuinely a new player to Path of Exile with Metamorph League, or B, it's because you're here for the nostalgia kicks of checking out Enki's Arc Witch, because I know a bunch of you have joined our community and have played Arc Witch itself thanks to Enki's well-written guide. There's around 12 million views right now on this particular guide over its life cycle. It's been out since Christmas Day of 2014. Now, this particular build, it's to me, it is like the definitive how to make a build forum post. It is the definitive way of how to build a path of building. And there are so many things inside this particular guide that are friendly for new players, that help new players learn about Path of Exile. I myself learn new things about Path of Exile whenever I come back and check in on this particular thread, because there's new questions that are being raised from new players who are coming with slightly different gaming backgrounds all the time, and Enki does a great job of keeping this build up to date. Now, we'll start off with a little bit of gameplay footage just to show you exactly what this looks like. I would highly recommend that you go over to Enki's channel on YouTube, that you subscribe and ding the bell to be notified about new videos when he puts them up for this particular build. This is not 3.9 gameplay footage yet. This is would be 3.8 gameplay footage, but this is with the tree that he's got set up for 3.9 as it comes out. So again, the content, the bosses, and the monster life isn't all the same, but you can get at least a bit of a feel for what this build does, which is it leap slams around and it gives itself fortify, and then of course it blows everything up that's within range of chaining via arc. And this arc is a self-cast arc. It does a bunch of different types of builds, and you can see he's got several different golems going on up in the corner. He's got auras that he's using. He's taking advantage of various flask mechanics. There's just a whole slew of gameplay features in Path of Exile that you will become familiar with and exposed to if you play Enki's Arc Witch. So that's enough gameplay footage for right now. Of course, if you want to see more, you can always do so by looking at any of the links that are down below in the video description. Of course, we've got links to Enki's guide, but then again, you could probably just Google Arc Witch and it'll probably be the first thing that will pop up. But all of those references will be included down below, including the path of building, in our video description. So, Enki expressly states down inside the contents of his build that this is not the strongest build. I wanted to read this first before we even talk about pros and cons. So he openly admits, hey look, this is not the strongest build out there, because his goal wasn't to make the strongest arc build. His goal is to do something a bit different. So let's check it out. Even though many veterans, including myself, enjoy this build, the main focus is still on providing new players an approachable build without many restrictions, and that comes with a compromise. So with all that said, please stop rating self-cast arc's viability based on this build when it's not even meant to be the most min-max high-end self-cast arc build to begin with. Besides, I don't think it's healthy for the game to force the most broken meta upon new players. All that does is creating a false sense of this game and lots of disappointment about other builds. So that's his disclaimer as you get into the build. Now, pros, cons about picking this particular build. Maybe if you're a new player or you're coming back or returning from a break and Metamorph is going to be a league for you, then you'll want to consider these pros and cons. First off, this build is cheap and it is fully capable of being played in solo self-found. So if you hate trade and you're not going to involve yourself in trade whatsoever, that's fine. You can play this on an SSF budget. It's also very smooth, and the progression for leveling your character and for pushing your itemization is quite clearly laid out for you by Enki for this particular build. There's no big hiccups as you're going along the way, and you can continually see progress in your character with pretty much every gameplay session. The gameplay in its smoothness, I will simply, again, reference the gameplay footage that you see. It's leap slamming and then arcing. You don't have to worry about, let's say, totem placement. You don't have to worry about, let's say, various degens or various multiple other trigger skills that you're using. You don't have a whole bunch of cast when setups, either for cast on crit or cast when damage taken. You can just worry about leap slamming, proccing your fortify, and hitting arc. And that's the bulk of your gameplay, which means it's very, very smooth. It's going to be movement, damage, movement, movement, damage, movement, damage, 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 movement, right? It's very, very smooth for newer players. It's also something that you are capable of playing, for the most part, as you level. A lot of different builds have got a problem where they recommend an alternative leveling method to what the end game product of the build will look like. And for new players who maybe haven't experienced all 10 acts of Path of Exile's story and who maybe have never even made it to maps before, they're not sure what a build should look like when they see in a build guide that it says that the end game version of the build looks completely different, or even slightly different than the build looks as you're leveling it. A lot of players want to play using their end game skills immediately as they are progressing through the 10-act story of Rayclass. This, of course, build is also fully immune to reflected damage. Sometimes newer players can get tricked by reflected damage. They're not quite sure exactly what blew them up, when in reality the thing that blew them up was themselves. And so a build that is fully immune to reflected damage is quite helpful for newer players. It's also capable to do all boss fights and map mods. Now, that's the list of pros. That doesn't mean this is the perfect build. Again, this build is not as high DPS potential as some other arc builds. The lightning has inconsistent damage output, which means sometimes you're going to jump into a pack and you're going to fire arc and the whole pack is going to explode and it's going to feel great. And then sometimes you're going to leap close to a pack, you're going to fire arc, and you're going to go, huh, did that do anything? So there are going to be moments of that. Then lastly, it is not a deep delving build, so think about it as though if you want to hit 1k depth or beyond, Enki himself says, hey look, this build isn't meant to do that. But if you're a new player, hitting eye level 83 depth for the first time is something that a great many people have never done. So if you set yourself as a new player, as maybe having never played before, or maybe you've never delved past, the initial inquiry that Nico makes in Act 3 now when he introduces himself to you, if you've never pushed far, you'll be able to push pretty far into delve, depending on your goals for the league. Now, there's a lot of different mechanics going on in this build. I'm not going to read this word for word. I just want to show this to you, how well Enki has laid out the information that is available for you. Not only does he have a mechanics section, he's of course got a leveling section that tells you exactly what to do before you start leveling, while you're leveling, and then even thinking back on how to continue to improve your leveling if you should choose to replay this build, or different alternate options that you could have as you're playing and as you develop more familiarity with the mechanics that are in Path of Exile. So I wanted to show this off because this is a classic build in Path of Exile that has earned its place in PoE's history. Now, we've got Enki's path of building that is pulled up here. His tree is, for the most part, going to be relatively consistent. I'm not going to say straightforward, because as you can see, there are several different branches that we are going to go down. Now, one of the things that I love about Enki's path of building is that he's got several different trees that you can pull from when you pull up path of building. So you can look down and see, hey, in Act 1, where should I be and what should I prioritize? When I hit Act 3 and I reach the Sarn encampment, what should my tree look like? When I hit Act 5, let's say, when I kill innocents and I lose resistances for the first time, what should I expand into? And then going on and eventually fighting Kitava, what should my tree look like? And eventually, as I push into maps, into yellows and into reds, and as I hit level 90, what should my mostly finished tree look like? So Enki's done a great job of showing you and giving you developmental stages that you can pick from, so that way you don't have to feel like, as you're leveling and playing the game, that you're lost or that you're panicking when you level up and you're not sure where to place a point. This build does an exceptional job of helping new players and walking them through every step along the way for each decision that they have in front of them. Next up, besides for his tree, he's also got great notes. He's got all sorts of explanation about how you can use this path of building, how you can calculate your DPS, and how you can use path of building in general. Not only does Enki do a great job of introducing new players on how to play mechanically with Path of Exile, but he does a great job introducing new players on how to use path of building, which is an incredibly useful tool for players who are looking to get into PoE. And there are many of us out there, I know I'm one of them in the G3 community, who spend nearly as much time in Path of Building as we do in-game. And oftentimes we have both of them pulled up simultaneously as we're looking and theory crafting ideas back and forth. So it's a wonderful, wonderful, well-written guide. When you start looking at his skills and you come over to Arc, you can see that his Arc setup is set up with Arc or Vol Arc, depending on what it is that you want to be using actively. Spell Echo, Lightning Penetration, Energy Leech, Inspiration, Added Lightning Damage, and Empower. He's got these listed in a couple of different tiers. You can swap these out. Of course, in terms of priority, I would go from top down, but of course you can always swap that out if you'd like. If there's a particular other gem that you would really rather use, you can do that. Again, this is not maximized to be the best DPS-wise. It's maximized for smoothness for new players. So, again, if you're going to drop me a comment down below that says, "Oh, Iron, what are you even talking about? Enki doesn't even have, like, top-tier DPS." I'm just going to reference Enki's own build and say, yep, he knows that. He didn't design it to do that. All right, in terms of bandits, you're going to want to kill Alira. And then in terms of his other gem setups that he's got for buffs, he's got Steel Skin, Arcane Surge, Increased Duration, and Efficacy. For his movement skill, he's using Leap Slam with Fortify. And then you're going to want to choose between either Onslaught or Faster Attacks, depending on what it is that you feel is a better quality of life for you. His golem setup is quite unique. It's quite interesting when you're looking at it because, of course, he is an elementalist. He's got Summon Lightning Golem, Summon Flame Golem, Summon Chaos Golem, and Summon Ice Golem, all as options. And then he's also got Minion Life, Empower, and Meat Shield connected onto his Ice Golem in particular in this particular setup. Now, itemization. He has said that this entire build can go as a solo self-found build. That being said, there is a whole slew of items that he has set aside for you, both as uniques as well as rares that he has simply titled low budget, medium budget, and high budget. So in other words, you can set up the entire build and say, well, maybe I've got low budget gloves and I've got high budget shoes that I found, but maybe what should I prioritize next on my chest? Or what should I prioritize next on my weapon? Or what do I need to prioritize on my helm? Again, he does a great job of offering options of different sorts of rares or uniques that can fit into multiple different item slots to fulfill multiple different needs in this particular build. I have never seen in my entire time playing, reading, and enjoying Path of Exile anyone that has shown as much care and taken as much time to ensure that their build and all of the various ways of accessing it and learning about it are as clear and are as easy to follow as Enki's Arc Witch Guide. Now, one last thing that I did want to say about being an elementalist. A lot of people out there don't like the elementalist tree for whatever reason. People just don't like it. Well, there's some great things that are out there and available. One of them is Paragon of Calamity. I know a lot of people don't necessarily like Paragon of Calamity, but it gives you that all-important mod, cannot take reflected elemental damage. Since we're doing primarily and basically all lightning damage, we cannot take reflected elemental damage, which means we're not going to take that reflected damage as it's coming back at us, which is very, very helpful for new players. Moving on, you've got Liege of the Primordial. This gives you +1 maximum number of golems, and it also increases your buff effects of your golems, which is quite important to the DPS of this build. You've got Elemancer, which also gives you another golem, so now you're rocking 3 golems, and again, once you'll get all of these different golems out, each one of their buffs is going to continually be improved as you continue to ascend on your elementalist passive tree. So each one of these buffs that you have out feels better as you continue to progress your Ascendancy. So it's not as though your Ascendancy is just buffing your main skill, as it were, or, your main defensive layer, but it really feels as though the entirety of your build, your golems themselves, your abilities, and your auras that are thankfully provided by many of your golems are all growing together. So it's a really nice sense, right? It's not a minions number thing. It's not a min-maxing DPS thing. It's just a real nice sense as you're playing Path of Exile that you can really tell and notice, oh, my ice golem or my flame golem really feels like it's doing extra work for me now after my most recent Ascendancy. And that's really, really cool for new players to see because they can appreciate the value in actually going forward and progressing with their Ascendancies. Lastly, on Ascendancy, he's got Pendulum of Destruction, which of course bounces between gaining increased area of effect for 5 seconds and gaining increased elemental damage for 5 seconds. It's relatively generic, but it's also very, very strong for this particular build because all of our damage is elemental damage and the area of effect never hurts as well. So, all of that being said, this is Enki's Arc, which I personally think that when I drop into SSF, I'm going to play Enki's Arc Witch in SSF. That's going to come sometime in the new year, maybe 2020, maybe in the summer of 2020, maybe that's when I'll play. But I personally have loved this particular build guide. It's inspired me whenever I've written or done any kind of these build discussions. Oftentimes I will go back and look at Enki's Arc Witch Guide and just wonder, how is it that Enki presented this? And how can I learn from his presentation of teaching new players the game? So it's very, very inspiring in that regard. And I think a lot of us who design content and who design discussions and who design builds could learn a thing or two from Enki in the way how he presents his information and in the way how he even uses tools like Path of Building to try to walk characters along and players as they are learning more and more mechanics of Path of Exile. Anyway, that's our featured build discussion for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. Go ahead and drop us a comment down below to let us know whether or not you'll be league starting with Enki's Arc Witch during Metamorph League in 3.9's expansion that drops today. Speaking of which, I hope today is the day on League Launch Day a Mirror of Galandra drops for you. Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.